Hello, and welcome everyone to the Afghanistan podcast. Joining us today, we have Carl Zha. Carl is a geopolitical analyst and a podcast host. He hosts the podcast Silk and Steel. If you haven't heard it already, I'd highly recommend go and check it out straight after this podcast. I'll also leave some links in the show notes, so do check that out. So, Carl, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Tapping. Thank you for inviting me.
Brilliant. Carl, you're joining us today from Indonesia, beautiful place. Tell us a little bit about your background. I think you were born in China, you've lived in America, you're in Indonesia now. You have it must give you a really good kind of insight into different cultures and helps in geopolitics.
You got that right. I was born in China in 1976, 1 month after Mao died. So I'm the first post-Cultural Revolution generation of Chinese growing up in China. When I spent my my youth, most of the decade of 80s in China, and then my dad came to U.S. to study for his PhD in 1985. So I joined my dad in 1990, and then I went to high school, college in U.S. I spent almost 20 to 30 years in U.S. And now I live in Indonesia. I live in Bali because I love to surf, and I came here for surfing, but I fell in love with the island, and now I married a local. I'm raising my kids here, so I have traveled a bit. Yes.
Very good. So I think when you moved to America, it was after the Tiananmen incident. Is that right?
That's correct. So the Tiananmen student protests happened in 1989. So I was actually in China at the time. I was about 13 years old. In fact, I grew up in college campus because my dad was a lecturer at the University of Chongqing. So I kind of witnessed the student protests at close range, you might say. And then after the protest happened, my parents decided to stay in U.S. Both of my parents were already in U.S. at the time. They decided to bring me to U.S. That's why I came to U.S. in 1990.
That's what I was wondering. So, listening to your background, I would have thought you would be in your geopolitical worldview, you would be very westernized, kind of anti-communism and all of these things. So tell me how your views developed. Were you always of the views that you hold now that you talk about on your podcast, or did they evolve over time? How did you get interested in geopolitics in the first place?
Well, my view definitely developed over time because when I first came to U.S., I mean, I thought, I totally bought into the American dream. In my high school, I delivered newspaper for New York Times, so I had a habit of reading New York Times every day. And New York Times shaped my worldview from my teenage years to early 20s. So you can say I was a liberal. I was American liberal up to my to my college graduation, and I knew that their reporting on China was a little bit off because the China that appeared on the page of New York Times bears no relationship to the China I just left behind. I just chalk that off as, okay, the Westerners, they just don't get China, right? The mysterious Orient is too much for the comprehension of the Western mind. That's what I thought at the time. But later, when I started working in 1999, right around the end of the first internet bubble, and
Yes.
At that time, I was just, I was very interested to read about the world news. I came across a American expat magazine that was published out of Moscow. It was by people like Matt Taibbi, Mark Ames, John Dolan. Matt Taibbi, now he has gone mainstream. He went to work for Rolling Stones, etc. But back then they were running this kind of expat online magazine. They talk about post-Soviet Russia, which is the area I was interested in. And I remember Matt Taibbi, he will write about how Western reporting was done on Russia. Basically, he said, because he wrote for these Western mainstream media channels, he said he will have a template. He will have the story written while he was on the plane on his way to an interview in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. So by the time he arrived, he just need to fill in the names of the people he interviewed. And I thought, wow, okay, it makes so much sense now, because that made me realize the reporting on Russia is exactly how they do reporting on China. Everything is based off a template. And everything is based from a particular point of view. In case of Russia, they would just blame everything on the Soviet Union, even though this was early 2000s. So the Soviet Union has already collapsed for more than a decade, and they're still blaming whatever social ills of Russia on the Soviet Union. And in China, it's the same thing. That's why I realized this is not cultural difference that caused the kind of the distorted reporting Western media. It's actually propaganda. It's a continuation of the Cold War propaganda, and then I start, I when the Syrian war happened, I went online. I opened my Twitter account. I try to follow all kind of news sources, because I don't trust Western mainstream media anymore. Actually, before that, what really radicalized me from a New York Times reading liberal was the Iraq War. Because I remember at the Iraq War, New York Times was one of the newspapers that was really whipping up the fear among the American public about WMD. They were doing reporting about the Niger yellow cake and all these fake stories that led to the invasion of Iraq. At that time, even though my worldview has been shaped by New York Times up to that point, I still recognize that was bullshit. And I was outraged at what was happening, and so that together with what I witnessed, that's really kind of start me on the path of radicalization, you might say. I don't, from that point on, from the Iraq War 2003 on, I no longer consider myself American liberal. And then when Syrian war happened, I took to Twitter because I try to follow direct sources. I don't trust mainstream media anymore. I follow everybody. I follow ISIS sympathizers. I follow Syrian government supporters. I follow all these Western think tanks. Then I try to gain and then I witnessed firsthand how the narrative was spun in the Western media, because a lot of times the Western media, they don't even have a reporter on the ground in Syria. They're just reporting directly from their people, their contacts, who like it's completely ridiculous. Then around the first term of Trump, which is around 2017, 2018, when kind of the anti-China propaganda really got whipped up to 11 in the U.S. That's when I felt compelled to speak out, because I took to use Twitter as a platform to share what I know about China, my experience with China, which is very different from the mainstream media reporting. And I just want people to realize that the view they're getting from about China is actually does not accurately reflect the reality on the ground. And so, somehow I gather a large following, and, that led me to be on your show.
Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this episode. Let me just take a moment to introduce our sponsors for today. This episode is kindly being sponsored by the Worldwide Listings Company Limited, or WLC for short. WLC is a complete A to Z Amazon account management service. So if you're looking to start an e-commerce business, or you already have a business that you want to take to the next level, then get in touch and WLC will be able to help. Just for transparency purposes, let me also mention that WLC is a company that I personally created and I'm a director of. So when you get in touch with WLC, you will be speaking with directly myself or my team, and we very much look forward to speaking with you to see how we can serve your needs. Thank you. And with that said, let's get back to the episode. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm glad that the events of Iraq, as horrible and um, saddening as they were, I'm glad that they kind of put you into this new trajectory. Because living here in the UK, what I see is obviously there's constant warmongering, wars being created, manufactured around the world by West and their kind of allies, destroyed Iraq, Libya, what's happening in Egypt, Yemen. It's just kind of the list just goes on and on. And living here in the UK, my experience is when I speak with local people, friends, relatives, they're sick and tired of all these wars. And they're constantly saying that our governments need to stop getting involved in American wars and all of these things. But as soon as the next war is in order, everyone kind of gets in line. And it's like nothing happened previously. It's like this is the first time. So that kind of is a bit depressing to see that when things are going bad, they're saying we shouldn't get involved in these foreign wars. But as soon as a new one's being manufactured, they forget everything and they just kind of just get in line, which is exactly kind of what we saw in Ukraine, and how the West reacted in that war. It was completely silencing all dissent, not having any critique of any sort. Um, and for this Western culture that bangs on about like freedom of expression and liberty and all of these things, it just didn't sit very well with me. But I, I do thank God for China and Russia, because it wasn't for China and Russia, being a Muslim, I think we would have so much more heat on us all the time. So I think China and Russia are there to take some of that off from us Muslims. Carla, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I was just waiting for you to finish your statement.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do today is to talk to you about the events that happened in South Asia in May, the conflict that happened, of the terrorist attacks that happened in India, in Pahalgam, and subsequently how India reacted, and then the conflict that started, the role of China, but also maybe to fit that into the broader regional geopolitics, how it affects the region, but maybe even the world as a whole. So tell me, how, from where you are, how did you see the events as they unfolded?
Well, the timing was definitely interesting because, for a while, United States is trying to sign on India on its as part of Quad, right? The so-called Quad of democracies to contain China, the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia, but India at the same time is a member of BRICS, right? So I mean, India obviously is trying to get the goods from the both sides by being part
Yes.
of BRICS on one hand and being Quad on the other hand. But in more recent years, India has been kind of put under squeeze by Washington. This started when U.S. kind of put pressure on India for Indian purchase of Russian oil and gas, and immediately after that, we're starting to receive report coming out of Canada and US accusing Indian government of sending assassins to target US and Canadian citizens who
Yes.
are part of the Khalistani movement, the separatist movement for Punjab.
Yes.
And then India started to repair its relationship with China for a little bit. It looks like the two was start to have a soft approach moment. Right when that happened, Trump started a tariff war, and suddenly the Indian government took the swing to the other direction again. They were the first to send delegation to Washington to negotiate a trade deal, and they're trying to get the American corporations, especially like Apple, to move their production from China to India. At the same time, they are also jumping on the U.S. bandwagon to accuse China of unfair trade practices. They're going to ban Chinese investment and Chinese imports into India. So it's at this juncture when J.D. Vance, American vice president, visited India. And then right after that, the Kashmir attack happened. And almost immediately, the Indian government blamed Pakistan, even though they haven't really shown the world what evidence do they have for their claim, but they decide they're going to carry out a retaliatory strike against Pakistan. And this is this is obviously the Indian government is trying to play politics. They're trying to appease their own public who is crying out for vengeance. And Pakistan is just a very convenient target because the relationship between India and Pakistan has been tense since 1947, since the partition. And the Indian government led by Modi apparently wanted to score an easy political victory. They think they're going to just do a quick strike against what they call the terrorist camp inside Pakistan. And yet, at the same time, they try to avoid uncontrollable escalation. So on the first day when they carry out the strike, they order the Indian Air Force to launch the strike from within the Indian airspace, yet not targeting Pakistani military installations. But if you think about what that means, if they're not targeting military installations, what are they targeting, right? Well, Pakistan said they were targeting civilians, and whereas India claimed they're targeting so-called terrorist camps. But yet, in such an operation, I mean, I think in their kind of hubris and arrogance, they thought they could carry out the strike with impunity. India thinks itself as like Israel or America that can carry out airstrike with impunity against a neighboring country. But the problem is United States and Israel usually carry out attack against countries with no air defense and no air force. That's not the case for Pakistan. Pakistan, Pakistan have a very reputable air force with very experienced pilot, and on top of that, Indian government have been broadcasting their intention weeks in advance. They're like, we're going to do this attack. We're going to do this attack. So the Pakistani Air Force has been on alert for weeks. They had their planes up, patrolling the border, has radars up. So when the Indian Air Force made their move, their every move was being watched and recorded on the Pakistani side. And they took the appropriate countermeasure. And the result is what we saw was a humiliation for the Indian Air Force with multiple of their fighter jets being shot down, which the Indian news media is still in complete denial about, because in India they're living an info bubble. All these Indian news media, they painted like a bizarro world where India has destroyed major city in Pakistan, and it was game over, and it was a great victory. So, and all the Indian public bought that. But when the when the other independent when the other news channels, first Reuters and CAN, interview French intelligence, American intelligence, and everyone have confirmed what we witnessed first, from the wreckage of India's Rafale jets, that yes, indeed, Indian jets has been shut down. I mean, a lot of people in India are still being misled by their India. They're still completely in complete denial about what actually happened. But I think the people in charge, the Indian politicians, they knew what had happened. They knew they had been humiliated. That's why they followed the first day with more strikes on the following days. But except they learned their lessons. They learned their lessons by not using their precious manned fighter jets. They use drones. They use missiles. And then they call it a victory, and then that's what led to the ceasefire. So this whole I would call like an Indian fiasco was started because the Indian politician wanted to score easy points. They want to. This is a completely political move to tell their air force, okay, we'll just make this a surgical strike. Like you just carry out your air to ground missiles, target those ground. Don't worry about retaliation, and you'll be quick and easy victory. And this is what led to their humiliation. And I think they're still kind of butthurt about it. And this
Yes.
another thing about what happened was he kind of showcased the difference between India and Pakistan, where Pakistan has relied on their Chinese weapon systems, and the Indian rely on their weapon system, their French, Rafale jets. But the difference between the two is that China and Pakistan, they have they jointly developed Pakistan's JF-17 jets, and China gave like the hands-on training to Pakistani pilots on their J-10C fighter jets. The Pakistani Air Force was doing joint air drills with the Chinese Air Force. They do it every few years. Whereas Indian side, even though they're paying hundreds of millions of dollars for each Rafale jet, they're not getting the same kind of training from the French Air Force. They are paying through their nose, yet they're not getting the same quality of training, and that show in the most recent aerial combat.
I think you're so right. Um, Sitting here, like with my relatives in Pakistan, I have lots of relatives who are in the army in Pakistan. So I was getting like a lot of information of what was happening, but also just looking at the media in India, really, it was embarrassing. I was kind of feeling embarrassed for them, the news that was coming out. To start with, the fact that they don't know who did the attacks in Pahalgam, where they came from, who the people were, where they went. They don't know anything, but the one thing that they apparently know for certain, that it was Pakistan behind everything. So within an hour of the attacks, they started blaming Pakistan. But when the way that they dealt with the whole thing, I don't know if it was naivety or hubris or a mixture of both, but I think you're absolutely right. Somehow they think that they are Israel and Pakistan is Gaza. Um, Regardless of what you might think about your neighbor, it's a nuclear armed neighbor with a massive army. Might not be as big as your army, but it's big enough to defend their own country. So to start without any evidence, without any kind of um, justification, to just launch an attack on a neighboring country that's nuclear armed, and then actually genuinely be surprised that they reacted, because Indian minister was saying that we even informed Pakistan army that we're going to attack. We're not going to attack military bases. We're just going to attack terror camps, which I don't know how they decided what's a terror camp. And then to actually be surprised that Pakistan retaliated, and they retaliated so strongly. It's bizarre for such a big country with a sophisticated government and um, policies and procedures in place to kind of fall for such a stupid kind of a stunt just to start. I think they got carried away with the internal propaganda. I think these things come up from time to time as election time comes and as Modi needs more votes. They start something. So in 2019, they did something similar when Pakistan downed one of the jets inside Pakistan, captured their pilot. And at that time, they were saying, if we had Rafales, this wouldn't have happened. So we need to go and get some Rafales. So they went and bought some Rafales, came back and did the same thing and got even like worse treatment this time around. So it is bizarre what they did. But I think the outcome was very predictable. Um, and I think one of the main things is that with China's support, with the way Pakistan has developed not just its fighter jets and training inside the jets, but it's the whole system that's set up around it in terms of ears and eyes, um, um, information being fed to the pilots in the jets from so many different angles and points that they were able to see well beyond what Indian pilots, Indian jets were able to see or hear. The Pakistani jets were even, as you said, were able to record the conversation going on inside the Indian fighter jets. So I think it was that whole system that India just does not have that in place. So I think in that, with that kind of an attitude, whichever jets in the world they put in place, if they want to fight a war as it was 20, 30 years ago, with a standalone fighter pilot kind of having dogfights, I think they're going to have the same kind of result. And I was actually quite surprised that India doesn't have that kind of a network in place, a system in place to sit around to support the fighter jets as they go along. So it's like as Pakistan was saying, it's a multi-dimensional, multi-domain fighting. It's not just two fighter jets fighting each other, but it's a whole system that goes around it. And I think that's credit goes to Pakistan and China. And I think you're right. There's constantly been so many constant trainings um, uh, in that kind of a scenario to work that out. And I think that's where Indian Air Force was let down. I don't think they were let down by Rafales. I think actually they let the Rafale down. If I was the CEO of Rafale, I would be really annoyed at India at this point for letting their stocks go down like they did.
No, that's exactly right. There was a lot of hubris. I mean, even United States, I talk about Iraq War. Even United States went to the UN to present their bogus evidence about
Something, yeah,
WMD before the Iraq War. Even though everybody knew the Colin Powell probably hold a bottle of like detergent or something, and they claim it was anthrax. But at least they went through that whole process. They went through the motion. But India didn't even bother to do that because they thought, oh, we'll just be able to do it, and the world will just accept it. But that they got a reality check. And you're right. It's not just about pilot experience or the jet. It's about system integration. And one of the reason the Pakistan were able to score this victory on the first day is, first of all, they were tracking every movement on the Indian side on the radar, and they use AWACS planes which can see much further than the Indian French Rafale jets. And then their AWACS plane apparently has some kind of data link with their J-10C fighters. So when the AWACS were able to detect the Indian Rafale jets, they were able to send its coordinate, all the information through the direct data link to J-10C. So even though the J-10C pilot never saw the Indian Rafale jets, they got the coordinates. They just push the button, fires the missiles, and the rest is history. And I saw a video of the 2023 joint air drill between Pakistan Air Force and Chinese Air Force, and I saw at that's the first time when the Pakistan deploys their J-10C in the joint exercise. And I saw in the background they had AWACS taking off. So this is kind of the warfare that the Pakistan Air Force have been practicing and trained for. And they just put that practice and training into practice. And
yeah,
this is how a modern war is fought. This according to the Pakistani Defense Ministry's debriefing, there are over 100 jets on both sides involved. So this would make it the largest aerial battle in the 21st century. And in the modern warfare, it's all about system integration. It's about how you can process the information, and it's not the days of the Top Gun, the Hollywood movie anymore. I mean, I enjoy both Top Gun movies, but there's gonna be no dogfights. Okay, like
No.
to think there's gonna be a dogfight, that's ridiculous. Neither of
And
these sides of Pakistan or India, none of them came into visual range of each other.
yes,
You know,
exactly.
at best it was a blip on your radar, and then you just fire a missile and forget, and that's it. That's the end of it. So Tom Cruise
Yes.
would have no chance if he came face to face with a Pakistan 10 J-10C supported by his
Yes.
AWACS plane, because first of all, Tom Cruise was flying a very old piece of 20th century hardware, and
Mm.
it's a good Hollywood entertainment, and that's but the Indian Pakistan aerial battle actually showed us what a real 21st century
Yeah.
aerial combat will look like.
And the interesting thing is that all the briefings that Pakistan Air Force gave to the press um, is kind of, as things are unfolding, all of it is proving to be right. So what all of the planes that they said that they downed. So first India was saying that they had no losses. Then they said, okay, losses are part of the war. Then the chief of defense staff, I think sitting in Singapore, admitted that they actually grounded their whole air force for 2 days. So in a 4-day conflict, the whole Indian air force was grounded for 2 days, trying to figure out what's gone wrong. so it's it is quite embarrassing.
Well, in fact, Indian news media was actually the first to report downing of Indian jet. The Hindu, one of the main
Yes, yes,
newspaper from India, they're the first to report 3 Indian jets were down on the Kashmir side. But they were under some pressure to retract that story a day later. It was Reuters and CNN that follow up on that lead, and then interview French and American intelligence officials who confirm, yes, indeed, those jets were down. So it's I think a lot of it they're trying to cover up
yes,
for their Indian domestic audience, because they have promised the Indian public is going to be a spectacular operation. They were winning. They're winning so much, and but they have to cover up that embarrassment. But it just looks foolish in the eyes of the world.
yes. It's put India in a worse position, even in the region, than what they were at the start of May. But I think the really dangerous thing is that so the Indian Prime Minister is announcing that any future terrorist attacks inside India, first of all, they're not going to provide any evidence, and secondly, they're going to put all the blame on Pakistan, and then um, a similar event is going to take place, which is crazy, basically, because first of all, no country can guarantee that there's going to be no terrorism inside our borders at all. Secondly, if there is terrorism, you get to the bottom of what happened. If you can, you capture the terrorists that did it, you interrogate them, you put them in front of the press, and then you take things from there. But to have this kind of a policy is basically saying that we will put in the hands of any person in Kashmir who's not happy, who wants to start a nuclear war. All they would have to do is go outside with a gun and take out 1 or 2 Indian police officers or whatever, and that means a nuclear war is going to start. That's insane. And I think the whole region, the whole world has been put into a really dangerous situation that's not completely over, and we might have a replay, even a worse one, in days to come.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Carl?
Well, yeah, I mean, really to remove the root of terrorism, what India government needs to do is to uh, address the issue that caused terrorism in the first place. If they're able to satisfy all the demands of the Kashmiris and make sure they can have a prosperous life, and
Yeah.
where they are treated with dignity and respect and equality, I mean, they might be able to remove all the root cause of the terrorism. But right now, Indian government is not addressing the root cause. Instead, they are, they're doing a knee jerk reaction. Again, all they do is to put on a show for the public. Oh, now we're tough. We can take decisive action. We're gonna punish Pakistan. We'll be doing so much winning. But at the end of the day, there's a blowback. The blowback is actually a blow against the image of India
Yeah,
in the world audience. It damaged the reputation of India as a nation.
exactly. Also, looking at what happened, putting it in a slightly bigger context, um, what did you think about like how China came out very strongly in support of Pakistan? Obviously, China and Pakistan have had long-term, very good relationships with each other. But in the past, when things go wrong, at least in public, China's always just come out and said both sides should observe restraint. Both sides should refrain from war, and both sides should sit down and talk to each other. But this time around, China was very stern in their messaging, which I think took India by surprise as well. How do you see that, and why do you think, if there was any change from like the stand of China from past, why do you think that was?
Well, I think there are several things. First, China always advocate for regional stability. China wants to do business. Everybody last they want the last thing China wants to see is a destabilizing war on its border,
Yeah,
and but at the same time, China has been invested heavily in Pakistan. The CPEC, China Pakistan Economic Corridor, is actually a flagship project of the Belt and Road Initiative. And the goal of investing in infrastructure in Pakistan is so that China will have a alternative energy corridor all the way to the Persian Gulf. So the U.S. Because U.S. Navy keep on talking about how they're going to choke off Strait
yes,
of Malacca, choke off Chinese energy supply. But by building a port on Gwadar in Pakistan, which is near the mouth of Persian Gulf, and possibly eventually build a pipeline cutting through Pakistan, you will then China don't have to rely on Strait of Malacca anymore.
yeah,
Oil can go directly from the Gulf to Gwadar, gets loaded and goes through the pipeline to Western China. Now, during the Pakistan-Indian conflict, there's a lot of talks from the India side about how they're going to disrupt the CPEC, how they're going to even India is going to take the Pakistan administered Kashmir and to cut off Pakistan from China, to cut off the CPEC corridor. I mean, that's not China would not obviously would not stand
yeah,
for that. That's not in China's interest. And also for on the side of Indian officials have been publicly siding with United States, in this tariff war against China. Um, there's even less incentive for China to even appear impartial in this conflict. And this when China says in China and Pakistan are iron brothers, all weather friendship, they mean it.
yeah,
They mean it.
yeah,
It's not in China's interest to see Pakistan fall, just as
yeah,
it's not in China's interest to see Russia fall.
yes,
So China will make sure Pakistan remain a viable state in South Asia, and unfortunately, you know that's the reality that India have to have to
come to
deal.
terms with.
They have to
Yeah,
just accept the fact that yes, India is not the only country in South Asia. There are other countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and those are sovereign countries who can make their own foreign policy decisions about who to align with and who to do business with. And nobody like to be told what to do. Nobody need a big brother to tell them what to do. And this is the fact that Indian government have to make peace with.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I'm thinking, because I think this conflict also fits into the broader CPEC, the Belt and Road Initiative that China has, but also the Eurasia plan that Russia has in the North-South corridor. Because I think, first of all, Russia and China's strategic visions are really well aligned now, where the worldview and future trade routes that they have, they're coming into sync extremely well with each other and supporting each other. And I think this, so as I see it, the BRI that will go through Pakistan, even into Central Asia, because I think at the same time that's happening, Russia wants access to warm waters, which it can get either through Iran through Chabahar or through Pakistan through Gwadar. So in future, I can even see CPEC, Russia getting heavily involved in that as well, because unlike Chabahar port, which is only a trade port, the Gwadar port is like a dual purpose port, which can support military activity as well as trade. And I think for Russia, Russia has been for such a long time trying to get access to warm waters, which is part of their strategy in Syria, partly the cause for even back in the days, USSR, when they invaded Afghanistan, it was somehow to get access to warm waters, because it's been one of Russia's Achilles heels. And by creating this corridor, both China and Russia avoid Western dominated routes. So I think that brings both of those countries into alignment, but also it puts Pakistan strategically into a very kind of a central hub kind of a position. And I think it's interesting what's happening there, because China tried to invest in Chabahar port in Iran to see if they can bypass Pakistan to get access into Central Asia. But I think what was interesting for me was Russia's reaction in this whole conflict as well, because if we listen to Indian media at the moment, they're very shocked that even their old friend Russia didn't come out and support them. And I think one of the reasons Russia didn't come out and support them is how India is going full on into the USA camp in strategic terms, in military terms. And Russia's not happy with that at all. And also, obviously, Russia wants a closer tie with China. So I think all of this kind of fits in together to and shows where we're going, heading, which direction we're heading into in the future. One of the last things I want to say on this as well is that, so India was really happy that one of the only countries that supported them obviously was Israel, and the second one was the Taliban government in Afghanistan. But just, I think, about 2 weeks after this conflict, China invited the foreign ministers of Pakistan and Afghanistan, sat them down, decided that Afghanistan should be included in the CPEC and the BRI initiative. And that's how China can bring Afghanistan into its fold of influence. And that's freaking India out as well, because first of all, it was one of their only allies in the area. But secondly, it was their last route to Central Asia that's going to get cut off if China gets more investment into Afghanistan as well. So I think all of these things are really interesting developments happening at the moment.
Yeah, I just want to add another thing is the Muslim world mostly supported Pakistan, and
Yes.
if you look at BRI, if you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, one end node is obviously Europe, but the other end is all these Muslim countries all around Middle East, North and East Africa. I mean, the whole Indian basin is is heavily Muslim majority region. And these are the regions that China trying to expand into with the Belt and Road Initiative. And so that's another reason, for in many ways, Pakistan was an entryway for China into the Muslim world. And this is another thing that this just India just cannot compete in that regards, because especially with their the BJP government going on the whole like anti-Muslim thing in India, that's kind of turned off with the global Muslim majority, and this is where an area where um you know it's more incentive for China to. I mean, China was gonna side with Pakistan anyway, but the added bonus is also the almost entire Muslim world supports Pakistan as well.
Yes, very true. And how do you see, because everything is interconnected when we talk about geopolitics, and so um, I just touched upon how India invested in Chabahar and wanted to see if they can access Central Asia through Iran. But Iran is so important to China as well for um, energy resources, for oil and gas and all of those things. And China's invested heavily in Iran. But how do you see the talks that are going on currently between America and Iran, and what's happening in the Middle East? Do you think that they'll get to some kind of a compromise in the talks that are happening between USA and Iran, or do you fear that there's going to be some kind of a conflict there?
Well, so first of all, right now everything is actually up in the air in terms of U.S. Iran relation, because right now there's a strong push by Israeli lobby inside U.S. to push U.S. to go to war against Iran. I mean, there are many neocons in U.S. who much want to see that happen. I mean, General Wesley Clark, he mentioned this in an interview, I think more than 10 years ago. He said he saw the plan to take out 7 countries, right? Like all the countries in the list, Syria, Libya, Iraq, they have already fallen. The one last one standing is Iran. Iran has always been the target, and this is also the the big goal for Israel, because Netanyahu sees Iran as the biggest threat to Israel, and they themselves cannot take on Iran, so they want U.S. to do it for them. So there's a question whether Israel will bring enough influence to bring U.S. to a war against Iran. And as for the negotiation, let's remember Trump administration during its first term, they're the one who tore up the nuclear agreement with Iran. And we wouldn't have this second deal right now if Trump didn't tore up the agreement back during his first term. So the question again, it comes to trust. How can you trust United States at the words? One agreement signed with one president, in this case Obama, could be tore up by the next president. Well, who knows if even if Trump do come to an agreement with Iran, how is Iran gonna have the assurance that this agreement won't be tore up when the next president comes to the office? And I think eventually, I think at this point, eventually Iran will have to go nuclear, because United States will stop U.S. right now keep on threatening Iran precisely because Iran does not have nuclear weapons. You don't see U.S. making the same threat against North Korea right now, because North Korea actually do have nuclear weapon, and they have missiles to deliver it. And this is why we stop hearing about U.S. going to war against North Korea, because that would just be insane. And if you look at what happened to Saddam and what happened to Gaddafi, both have gave up their nuclear program in attempt to reconcile with the West, and they didn't end up very well. So the lesson is pretty clear. Iran needs a way to defend themselves, and the nuke is the best way to do it. And I think that's going to happen sooner or later. And whether you are, because right now there's a strong opinion inside the U.S. national security establishment that U.S. has limited resources He needs to pull out of Ukraine. He needs to pull out of the Middle East to concentrate on all its resources into contain China. However, U.S. still haven't pulled out of Ukraine. Despite Donald Trump pledging he will do it within 24 hours, and I don't think U.S. will be pulled out of Middle East either, because Israeli lobby just have such an outsized influence in the American politics. So I this is where I don't think there will be like a meaningful reconciliation between U.S. and Iran anytime soon. Just another side about Chinese investment into Chabahar port. I think that's more in competition with India, because India also had this so-called North-South project where they will try to link up Mumbai and Chabahar port. But India hasn't really come through with the investment. This is why China is also trying to move in. I think that it was not necessarily to replace Guadar. It's more
Yes,
as in, China is competing with India in for influence inside Iran.
absolutely. I think you're right, and because I think Iran has been pretty unhappy as well that the project on Chabahar with Indian investment slowed down because USA put so much pressure on India to back off from that project. So Iran's not entirely happy with that. And also, I think at the moment, there are lots of projects going on in building more railway network and road connections between Iran and Pakistan. So I was looking at like the maps that some of the Russian geopolitical analysts have been talking about on how Russia can get access to Gwadar from Iran, actually. And the reason that they would prefer Gwadar to Chabahar is two or threefold, because of its position, but because also it's connected to CPEC, which then connects Russia to China's BRI. And thirdly, because Chabahar is influenced by India, and India is now fully in USA camp. So Russia doesn't want to put itself in a position where by American influence, their trade route, their military access could be blocked in the future. So from that point of view as well, gaining access to CPEC for them is a better option. So I think that is quite interesting developments happening at the moment. Can you also tell me a little bit about, in your view, how do you see the difference? The differences are stark in the way China deals with geopolitics, and how USA deals with geopolitics. With USA, with the West, it's a complete kind of a zero sum. They have to take advantage of every country, take all the resources, and basically, if any country is winning, it means the West is losing somehow. Whereas with China and the whole BRICS project is completely the opposite. Is they're trying to create like win-win solutions, which I think is amazing, and it gives so many countries around the world such huge opportunities, which is why there's so many countries aligning themselves with BRICS. But I think it's really interesting for me to note as well, just looking at going back to this conflict between India and Pakistan, the fighter jets that Pakistan used, the J-10 fighter jets, were kind of a game-changing technology for Pakistan, and kind of clearly helped them defeat India on the battleground. But for China, it's not nearly anything like their best jets at the moment. Actually, I think they were thinking of kind of discontinuing these jets because they have others in the pipeline that are far superior to these. And it kind of made me think that it's amazing that China's had these jets in their arsenal for such a long time, but they were never tested. Whereas in the West, as soon as some new weapon is created, they either want to introduce it into a war zone, or if there's no war zone to be had, then they will create a war zone, just to kind of market their weapons so that they can sell them more and more. And with China, I think it's really telling that they were sitting on these J-10s for such a long time, and they've never been battle tested before. Obviously, China was claiming that they have these capabilities, but it was never battle proven. And I think that goes a long way to show the way China works in geopolitics.
Yeah, right. That's correct. I mean, China. There's a saying that China's business is business. America's
Mm.
business is war, right?
Yeah.
Because right now America has offsourced most of its manufacturing to the rest of the world. The only thing left in U.S. is making weapons. So
Yeah.
when U.S. they try talk about restart manufacturing or make America great again, they're talking about military Keynesianism. This is why Trump just increased the official military budget to over $1 trillion. That's what's on the books. Of course, there's a lot of things that's not even on their books because all the money, billions of dollars they're sending to Ukraine, that's not part of the official Pentagon budget. It's come from a
Yeah.
different budget. So the and Pentagon hasn't passed an audit for decades. So who
Yeah.
knows what the real military spending in the United States is? And and but because that's all they got. The but it's designed to function that way. Julian Assange said it best when he says Afghanistan war is not about winning the war. It's about washing vast sum of money from American and European taxpayer bases into the coffer of this very few transnational security elite. That's exactly what happened. And that's why they're manufacturing these wars and manufacturing consent for these wars. So, the money can continually flow to the 1%. It's about rent seeking. And this is why they see everything as a zero sum. Whereas China, they think, well, let's just grow the pie bigger, then everybody get larger slice of the pie. It's a different mentality, but this is why a lot more people especially in the global south are more receptive to that because everybody wants development, everybody wants infrastructure, everybody wants to improve their lives. That's what most people want.
Yeah.
Whereas in us, unfortunately, U.S. claim it's a democracy, but it's actually oligarchy. It's wrong for the benefit of very few, for the 1% who truly controls Washington, and that's a result we're seeing between China and U.S.
Absolutely right. And yeah, with America wanting to make itself great again, it's basically just saying this either kind of um, bring down every other economy so that America looks better rather than kind of to improve US economy itself. Like even political analysts like John Mearsheimer, when they talk about China, USA and China, it's a little bit surprising because in other regards, he's so right in what he says. But when it comes to China relationships, USA China, he's not talking about America making itself great again by improving its systems, improving its infrastructure, improving the lot of his people stop spending money on wars, invest in your human resources, in your infrastructure, in your IT systems, in technology. They're talking about how can we bring China down and how did we allow China to be so successful that now is at par with USA, and to make America better than China is to constantly put some kind of sanctions on China rather than trying to make America great by making America better. And I find it surprising coming
Exactly.
from
I mean,
people like Meishama. Yeah,
I
what do
have
you
a
say,
lot of
Professor?
respect for John. I have a lot of respect for Professor John Mearsheimer because he understands America very well. He
Yes.
understands American mentality very well, but he understands nothing about China. So I just turn off my brain when he talks about China because he when he's talking about China, he's actually not talking about China. He's projecting the American mentality onto the Chinese leadership, right? Like that, but that's not how the Chinese think. He thinks that's again. He thinks it's a universal truth. Everyone who reaches a certain level will act like United States. No, 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 no. U.S. is not the norm. U.S. is not the normal, right? And that's why I try to tell people, even though I there's something. U.S. in some way is exceptional. It is exceptional because it's extra bloodthirsty. We have never seen this kind of empire as the United States. It's not the norm. It's not the human norm. And this is why when Professor Mearsheimer, a lot of China hawks, they're talking about China. They're not really talking about China. They're doing projection. They project their worst fear onto China, and then during that funk, again, it's a reflection of their own very Western mentality.
Carl, I'm so glad that your internet held up because we were worried that we might lose connection at some stage, but it's been really good. Tell me a little bit about if people listening wanted to follow you. Obviously, I mentioned the podcast that you do, which is brilliant, and I really strongly advise everyone to go and follow. Where else can they find you?
Okay, so I do have a YouTube channel, just Carl Zha, my name, and I put out a video almost every day, and I'm a prolific shit poster on Twitter, now known as X, and for me it's mostly shit for shit and giggles, but for more serious stuff, go to my YouTube channel or go to Patreon. I do run my Silk and Steel podcast out of Patreon for my Patreon patrons, where I do a chronological retelling of the Chinese history from the very beginning. So now I'm at 375 BC. So I still have a long way to go.
Amazing. Brilliant. Carl, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. I hope you'll give us more time in the future. There's so much more to talk about, and there's constantly so many things happening that are worth talking about. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tafin. Anytime.
Thanks. Cheers. Bye-bye.